I'm going to cover a little bit on what's happening in the coup in Niger. President's being held by the military after a coup. The negotiations are supposed to happen today in Nigeria. Give you a little background, talk about the causes, foreign influences, and the overall outlook. Niger is located right here next to Mali, above Nigeria. Yes, Nigeria, Niger. Don't get them confused. The Sahel is this region across here. Down here is more lush tropical jungle. Up here is more desert, as you might already know. I worked a contract along right about there, Niamey, which is the capital of Niger, training troops and doing other stuff. A little bit of background.
Well, West African leaders will meet on Sunday in Abuja, Nigeria, to discuss the coup, with Nigeria and Benin acting as mediators. ECOWAS has meanwhile continued to call for President Bazoum to be reinstated, while Kenya and Libya have also urged calm and restraint.
Now, he said ECOWAS. ECOWAS is the Economic Community of West African States. And you can see that some are member states, some have been suspended. These were suspended because they also had coups. So if you overthrow a democratically elected government, that is the cause for kicking them out. Now, there's some background to this, probably. They're not saying it enough, but this was written back in, Sunday, July 30th. Well, not that long ago. ECOWAS common currency. Parliament blames dollar transactions or inflation in the region. They're not really covering this in the American press, but you can be sure that if we're experiencing inflation here because of what the Fed is doing, all that U.S. dollar denominated debt from every other country has to be paid in U.S. dollars. And if dollars get more expensive, it gets harder for them in those countries in their local currency. So they're definitely feeling it because they're downstream of the euro, and the euro is already devalued from what it was against the dollar. And the currency they use here, the Central African franc or the West African franc, these are both derivatives, for no other way to describe it, of the Bank of International Settlements. They control it, and it's backed by Europe. West African CFA, that's what Niger uses right here. Central African franc right here. We were using the CFA when I was there in 2007. The inflation wasn't as bad, so maybe they didn't feel as bad about being under the thumb of the Europeans at the BIS, but you can be sure that is a point of contention. It's been written about before. The CFA franc, French monetary imperialism in Africa. The guy raises a lot of good points in this article. It's been around since 1945 with Bretton Woods is when it first came out. Africa, he feels, can stand on their own 2 feet. One of the biggest contentions is that the Africans don't have anybody on the board. There are no members to have any decision-making power on their own money, because it's not really their own money. It's the CFA, which is governed by the BIS. So they're kind of the little brothers in this arrangement, not trusted with their own finances. How the France-banked African CFA works as an enabler and barrier to development. This is 2019. There's a lot of good points about this. France, Macron has said he said he wouldn't respond, but he's voiced the support for them getting their own, getting their own solution. But there's also standards that they insist for whatever would replace it. So it follows what the CFA has been doing with foreign assets, maintaining exchanges, government ceilings, debt ceilings. But who knows if they're actually going to get to do that or not. One of the reasons that has been discussed is France may like the idea of having some control over the currency. They can devalue it because that way they get less expensive uranium from Niger, which is Niger's chief export. And France gets 75% of its power from nuclear. So they have a dog in this fight when it comes to making sure they've got affordable fuel. I don't know if that's the only reason, but between this and inflation, you can be sure that there's enough of a boiling point. My guess is it's more of the inflation thing. The day-to-day people can't afford to eat. They're going to get upset. They're going to see the government as incompetent or not caring or answering to the Europeans too much. And that's, one thing lead to another. Meanwhile, when I was there, they were just starting Africa Command, which is based out of Stuttgart, Germany, not Africa. They had a small command with a general and a sergeant major and a few staffers back then, but they felt the need to get a foothold because they saw China getting not so much a military foothold, but an economic foothold. So what do? We send troops or send the beginnings of troops. Yeah, so anyway, it was led by this guy, William Ward, who turned out to be, a little self-interested. He got demoted. They brought him down from a 4-star to a 3-star, kicked him out because he was sending his mistress on a private military jet on private purpose, which is illegal as hell, and paying for other things. It was just classic corruption, but what can you do? AFRICOM still exists. This is the example of the Niger troops. It's what they looked like when I was there. They had the same type of Toyota vehicles, AKs, tan uniforms, prop-driven airplanes. It's adequate for what they do. And this is kind of the enemy in enemy and ally that people like France were used to supporting with their AMX-10s. And this is not the kind of thing you would send to Ukraine to fight the Russians. So you go from doing these kinds of conflicts, both France and the US, to fighting a first world military, and you learn a lot of lessons fast. But AFRICOM still exists, and what they do is they fight terrorism. Yes. But how does that terrorism exist? Well, there was some terrorism when I was there. I'm not going to say it never happened. But the Chinese, they don't go there to fight terrorism. They go to build things. I mean, the Americans show up, you get a presentation. The Chinese show up, and you get a mine, or a hospital, or a pipeline, or an industrial park. They want to do business, and they don't have a history of colonialism in Africa. Neither do the Russians. The Americans don't really have that big a colonial history, but the problem is the Americans go through a political lobotomy every 4 to 8 years, and that general that showed up last year, he probably retired by the time someone else shows up, and you get glad handing and not a lot going on. So they really can't, and the generals, by the way, they can't promise investment. They're not private companies. They're military people, so what do? They make promises for security and fighting terrorism, and then they go back to Congress, and of course, they get a job at Raytheon when they retire. And anyway, Russia forgave about $20 billion of debt to Africa. Now, Russia was not involved in Niger in that respect, but other African countries they did. And here's the thing: African liberation leaders like Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Nyerere chose communism over democracy for a reason. They had the wisdom to recognize that democracy is merely a cover for repression and murder. Now, it's too bad that back then, communism meant going along with Russia and or China, or Russia and by extension Cuba. If you're not going to go along with Western democracy, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be communist, but it's understandable why they went for that option back then. But the point is, they have no reason to fear Russia or China, and they're more willing to listen to them, especially if Moscow writes off more than $20 billion of debt. And he also says Russia, African countries uphold moral norms, social principles, oppose neo-colonial ideology. Well, they were never part of it. Opposed from the outside, okay? Uphold moral norms. Can we honestly say that the U.S. State Department is interested in that? And meanwhile, like I said, when I was there, there were some conflicts, and it had to do with the Tuaregs who live in the northern part of Niger and other areas. This blue one, these are the Tuaregs, and these are other tribes that Morocco and parts of Libya and Angola. There's always been some conflict, but it was mostly contained. It was not really too much down here. We had one instance I'll talk about later, but a lot of this was kind of able to be controlled by the military. They didn't have that much support. The trade routes are so old. Yes, the whole country, almost the whole country, is Muslim, but it was not extreme or anything. It was almost like there were real threats. Don't get me wrong. There's something called AQIM, Al Qaeda in the Maghreb. But we were, I don't want to say amplifying it, but it's hard not to think that if your business depends upon fighting terrorism, you're going to find terrorism. These are the Tuaregs, by the way. They don't necessarily look like what you might think an African looks like. They dress a little bit more like sand people from Star Wars, but yeah, this guy could look Afghani, by the way he looks. But yeah, they were pretty distinct. They didn't always wear blue, but another movie that's on the subject, March or Die, Gene Hackman, 1977. I'm not going to play it, but this is a pretty good movie to watch about the French Foreign Legion. Gene Hackman, Catherine Deneuve. It took place in Morocco, but there were definitely groups that were similar to Morocco, similar to the Tuaregs in Morocco. But people didn't think too much about that since then. 1977 to today, if you mention what a Tuareg is, people think you're talking about a Volkswagen. When I was there, this was the only terrorist attack that happened. It was during the Tuareg-led rebellion, but like I said, the Tuaregs were in the north. We were in Niamey. This was a landmine planted in a neighborhood not too far from where we were staying. It killed this local private radio station director. They said he was a DJ back then, but he was a popular figure. They didn't mean to go after him. I think they were going after military leaders because that neighborhood was full of generals and other senior officers. And really too bad for something like that. And there's not much you can do except address the grievance. I guess I'm not sure what the grievance is. I don't know enough about it, but it was the least of their problems in terms of poverty was more of a concern of theirs than other things. But meanwhile, of course, the French showed up and they demonstrated this while I was there. We watched one of these being used against some mines. They planted some mines, and this is I think it's a Serbian. Yeah, it's a Czech. It's a Czech device. machine that goes out and it spins chains with weights at the end to beat up mines and blow them up. They put 2 landmines out there. It beat up one of them. It missed the other. It's not as effective as other types of mine clearing equipment, but what the heck, it was free. But that's how it looks like in action. It sits there and whips the dirt in the ground and hopefully hits the landmine. Trouble is, it has a tendency to fling the landmines too. If it grabs one, it can send it flying. So it's not necessarily the best way to clear mines, but I think they accepted it because it was free. More recently, this was an SF team in 2017, tragically got hit in a village north of Niamey, up near the Mali border. This is their grid. These guys, their command sent them out there when they really shouldn't have gone out. They were already in the field for quite a bit. They needed a resupply. They needed to get, rest and recuperation, and then go back out maybe. But I don't know why they felt it was necessary to go up to this village and try to capture this terrorist leader from ISIS, I think. They said IS, Islamic State, so they didn't know exactly which group it was. But they went up there anyway, and that was this village here, Zermadare, which is not far from, Tongo is what it's called. I don't know why they're showing a cue of the tricycle, but this is not a place you'd find accidentally. You definitely have to want to go there. And like I said, Niamey's down here. Most of the military was based down around here. And these guys just, it really was unfortunate. 4 guys died from the SF team and a couple of guys from the Niger military. That's the grid that he gave. I don't know why he gave the grid, but the grid coordinate is out here, and the attack happened here. He could have been just so, disoriented that that's all he could do. But there was nothing to come save him anyway. They had no support. They were in soft vehicles. Anyway, that was 2017, and of course there's been a wave of attacks ever since then. Now, why do you suppose 2007 to 2017? What happened in between there? See, we got more proliferation of weapons and attacks. Oh, wait a second. Proliferation of weapons and armed fighters in the region. Wait a sec. Current instability associated with the collapse of the Libyan state in 2011. So we overthrew the Libyan state, littered the place with weapons, produced a bunch of armed fighters, and some of our guys are dead as a result. Look right here, Libya. Weapons go down here to Agadez, over here. Look at that. Tongo, Mali, right along there, if that line is accurate. Even if it's not, getting an AK is like buying the groceries at this point. Libya also, Gaddafi had about 20,000 surface-to-air missiles, shoulder-launched, SA-7s and SA-7 Alphas, and probably others, that he'd been buying since the 1980s. Now, even if only a few hundred of those things are still serviceable and they get out into the population, those things can be sold in the black market, and they're very easy to take down a commercial aircraft. I'm really not thrilled to know that's out there. Likewise with the 1,400 or so Stingers that we've sent to Ukraine. There's no way all those have been fired at targets. To shoot off a Stinger, you need to fire it at an actual target. Have they hit 1,400? Have they gone through all of them? Have they lost some of them? Has even one of them been sold? Probably. Black market's a pretty strong, powerful thing when you got no money. So between this and Ukraine, I'm not optimistic for not hearing about a shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missile being used in a terrorist attack. But don't worry, we've got since then, 2017, they've got Niger and the unstable neighbors, and they're building a $100 million drone base to monitor and respond to terrorist activities. Now again, these are terrorist activities that largely were caused by releasing all these weapons into the area because Gaddafi had to die, even though he was turning in his WMD that he had, chemical weapons, whatever else. Okay, we got successful elections in Libya. Don't worry about that. The UN will make sure that everything's all well and good. Yep, $100 million to build a drone base in central Niger. This is the previous president, not the guy that got kidnapped. What is it about Niger, you think, that's happening? Let me just see if I can peel this back a little bit. Niger itself, it's a fragile state. Yeah, there's a part of this video where they talked about what was going on. Coup declared. That's them giving a speech. I don't recognize any of these guys, and since 2007, the guys that we trained have probably all gotten out of the military. If they are senior officers, they're not in this picture. But yeah, Colonel Amadou Ahmadrabi doesn't ring any bells. So yeah, the cause of it all, though. Unforeseen announcements. Why did the situation get worse? All those countries Mali, they had a coup. Burkina Faso, they had a coup. That looks like Larry Fink back here. I know it's not, but geez, I wouldn't be surprised if it was. The NATO-led takedown of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 triggered a new conflict. Was that really necessary? Of course not, but hey, business is business. And meanwhile, what did China's flurry of African engagements have to do with Ukraine? Well, maybe nothing, because China's been engaging Africa like I described. This is not new for them. And they don't send military, typically. Not saying they wouldn't send materiel, they do. Not saying they wouldn't send trainers, they probably have. But, they send business. They don't send PowerPoint. They don't send, glad handing and nonsense. They mean business. They want to get stuff done. So Niger, by the way, back then, this is in March 2022, voted to support the Ukraine measure. You think they're going to support it now? Now the president has been deposed. There's a military coup. China's spending money there. Russia, well, we'll get to them in a second. We got a drone base out there, right? Yeah, out there in the middle of nowhere, not too far from Agadez. Military intervention in Niger. And you can see here that Trump and the United States Africa Command laid out plans to withdraw about 25% of military forces in Africa. They want to focus on Russia and China. That might have been true. That doesn't mean Trump was going to go to war with Russia and China. Probably not. But the fact he is pulling out of Africa Command, how do you think that went over? They just got this thing off the ground and now he wants to pull 25% of the troops out of there? That's not popular. Not just with the military itself. Oh yeah, by the way, that base is going to cost $280 million by the time they get done with it next year. And here it is. This is the base. Yeah. What do we build this base for if you're going to pull people out, right? I mean, yeah, we got guard towers, air-conditioned guard towers with firing ports. We're ready to stay there for a while. Oh yeah, they stole $40,000 in U.S. taxpayer money outside the base. Somebody ripped it off. I don't know how secure the area is, but if you couldn't stop it, I don't think they showed up on camels, but who knows? They might have. But this is big money here. Amentum is the 12th largest government contractor. They have bought up companies that I used to work for, DynCorp and PAE and others, perhaps. That's their CEO. The owner is American Securities and Lindsay Goldberg. They are two private equity groups. We'll just focus on Lindsay Goldberg. That's two different guys. Alan Goldberg and Robert Lindsay. And you can see here the voting habits of Alan Goldberg, just as an example. Goldberg and Company, investment professional, behind Romney, $35,000. Now, when he hears, if he supported Romney, this is 2012, he probably didn't support Trump in 2016. And then he heard Trump wants to get rid of 25% of the forces in Africa. How might that affect his investment? Yeah, well, France and EU, they're cutting off support to Niger following the coup. Yeah, bad. Okay, so, oh wait, that's right. Prigozhin's celebrating it. Now, obviously, he's got a profit incentive too, but he's also got a track record of sending Wagner to Mali. And France actually voluntarily handed off their military to, the French military handed off their power to their mission to the Wagner troops. And they've been there ever since. And they could probably do a thing or two in Niger. So who knows? Again, Russia doesn't have a colonial history. They come there, they mean business. So if China is going to do the industry side of it and Russia is going to do the military side of it, or maybe a little of both, where's the piece of it for the U.S.? Does there need to be a piece? Well, I can tell you that people have made their voice clear. Supporters of the coup on July 30th, Abbas le Français, vive Poutine. So down with France, long live Poutine. That's interesting. It's a Quebec dish. I don't know why they're celebrating it. Maybe some guys spent some time in Quebec. It's kind of funny. Abbas la France and down with France. This is back in September 2022. Long live Russia. We're not winning any friends here. But don't worry, Blinken to the rescue. And how's he going to save it? Well, Blinken is going to support it with the African Growth and Opportunity Act. The African Growth and Opportunity Act was a law passed by Congress to help Africans. Now, of course, that money comes with strings attached. Here's what it actually does. Let's see. Rule of law, political pluralism, right to due process. Okay, all very good. Protection of labor rights. Okay. Also, in addition, the country may not engage, this is the qualifier for this aid, by the way, the country may not engage in activities that undermine U.S. national security or foreign policy interests, or engage in gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. The State Department's foreign policy interests. And what internationally, now internationally means Europe, America, Japan, Australia. That's what the international community actually means, right? So if you don't go along with what they believe in, then you're violating internationally recognized human rights. Yeah. So if you don't wave this flag, if you don't support that, if you don't, stand on one foot and whistle whatever we want you to whistle, then you don't get the money. It's more the same kind of neocolonialism that's being brought in the same way it was with the EU all through these years in Niger and every other African country that takes this money. This is why every time you hear Africa changing laws, it's probably got something to do with the U.S. pulling financial strings. I don't know how much longer they'll be able to do this. It's supposed to get renewed it's due to expire in 2025. I suspect they're going to renew it. They'll just print more money. But no matter how much they print, Africa has Russia and China as business partners and security partners. I don't know why they need us. And, maybe they don't need us. Anyway, that's all I got for today. If you want to leave a comment, please do. Thanks.